The night had fallen over the suburban street, but the quiet felt heavier than usual. Streetlights cast fractured shadows across neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, and the sidewalks the neighborhood kids knew so well. The wind whispered through the trees, stirring dry leaves in restless patterns. It was the kind of quiet that felt alive, like the world was holding its breath. Jordan and Jamal, twins identical in every way, walked home from school. Their backpacks bounced lightly with each step. They joked quietly, unaware of the tension threading the air around them. Everything about this walk should have been ordinary, routine, harmless. But tonight, even the smallest movements seemed loaded with meaning for someone else. Across the street, Carol Whittaker sat stiffly on her porch, gripping a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Her eyes tracked the twins, and the intensity of her gaze made the scene feel surreal. Each gesture, each step of the boys was magnified in her mind. The twins bent down to adjust a shoelace, laughed at something only they understood, shifted their weight as they walked, each movement in Carol's eyes suspicious. Her fingers hovered over her phone, trembling slightly. She muttered to herself almost inaudibly, "Something's not right." Her pulse quickened, and the phone felt heavier in her hand. It was as if the quiet street was conspiring with her own fear, amplifying every detail until reality and paranoia blurred. In that frozen moment, she hit call. The soft click sounded louder than it should have, cutting through the stillness. She dialed 911, convinced that she had witnessed something she couldn't ignore. The twins didn't hear the sound. They didn't see the way Carol's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward on the porch, waiting for a response that would soon change everything. They only knew the wind brushing their faces and the way the streetlights stretched shadows across the pavement. Seconds later, the faint wail of approaching sirens began to grow. The twins glanced at each other, puzzled. They had done nothing wrong. They were just walking home, but in less than 2 minutes, their ordinary evening would become a nightmare they couldn't have imagined. The first police car turned the corner, headlights cutting through the darkness. The twins froze, unsure why their hearts were suddenly pounding. Another car followed, and then another. Within moments, they were surrounded by uniforms, radios buzzing, flashlights cutting across their faces. "Hands behind your back," an officer shouted, and suddenly what had been a normal street was transformed into a scene of accusation. Jamal raised his hands instinctively, confusion and fear twisting his young face. Jordan did the same, eyes wide, searching for understanding in a neighborhood that had always felt safe. Carol watched from her porch, a mix of satisfaction and unease rippling across her face. She didn't notice the twins trembling, didn't notice the rapid blinking and the tiny, involuntary shakes of terror that ran through them. She only saw the scenario she had conjured in her mind: strangers, threats, danger. And what she didn't know, what no one on the street could have predicted, was that the mother of these twins, Maya Williams, was the woman who had appeared live on the evening news just hours earlier. The woman whose name carried weight, whose face commanded attention, whose voice had demanded justice for children across the city. If Carol had only known, the entire scene would have been unimaginable. The fear that propelled her hand to the phone now hovered on the precipice of irony and consequence. The twins were handcuffed before they could explain. Their protests were drowned out by protocol and assumption. Each officer's glance carried weight, authority, and an unspoken question. "Why are these boys here?" Jordan and Jamal were silent, shocked, and deeply frightened. From the porch, Carol's eyes widened as she realized the world outside her small fears was more complex, more consequential, and far more dangerous than she could have imagined. What she didn't know would change everything. And in that moment, the ordinary street, lined with houses, trees, and neighbors, had transformed into a battlefield of bias, fear, and innocence. A place where a single decision would ripple into lives forever altered. The sirens continued to echo, shadows danced across the twins' faces, and a quiet tension settled over the street, thick and suffocating. Tonight, no one would walk away unchanged. The twins walked inside their house, the familiar click of the door behind them sounding impossibly loud. The evening sunlight had faded, leaving only the golden glow of the living room lamps to fill the space. The house smelled faintly of dinner, the kind of homey aroma that should have made them feel safe. But tonight, nothing felt normal. Jordan dropped his backpack near the door, the straps tangled, his hands still shaking slightly. Jamal followed, slumping into the couch as if the world had grown heavier with every step. They didn't speak at first. The tension from the street clung to them, invisible but suffocating. Maya watched silently, noting the subtle tremors in her son's shoulders, the way they avoided meeting her eyes. Her heart ached, a dull, persistent thrum that she had learned to recognize instantly. Something was wrong, and she knew before a word was spoken. Finally, Jordan's voice broke the silence, small and uncertain. "Mom, why did they?" The words faltered, unformed, because even Jordan didn't know how to describe the fear that had gripped him just minutes ago. Jamal didn't answer. He couldn't. He wrapped his arms around himself, his chest rising and falling rapidly, trying to calm his own pulse. The twins had spent a lifetime navigating the world side by side, but tonight the world had moved faster than either of them, and neither had been ready. Maya stepped forward, kneeling to meet their eyes. She didn't scold, didn't question. She just held out her hands, inviting them into a protective space. The twins hesitated, then fell into her embrace. Their mother smelled like lavender and determination, the kind of scent that made them feel both grounded and shielded. They stayed like that for several moments, not speaking, just breathing together. Outside, the street had gone quiet. The lights of the police cars had disappeared, leaving only shadows behind. But inside, the storm lingered. Maya's mind raced. She had seen bias before. She had felt it in her own life. But tonight it had come home to her children in a way she could not ignore. Not a theory, not a headline, but flesh and blood, innocence and fear, right in her living room. She guided the twins to the kitchen table, where the dinner dishes still sat untouched. The remnants of the meal now seemed trivial compared to what had just happened. She sat down, motioning for them to do the same. Jordan and Jamal obeyed reluctantly, still glancing nervously toward the window, as if expecting the sirens to return. Maya spoke carefully, her voice steady but gentle. "I need to know everything," she said. "Tell me exactly what happened." Jordan inhaled sharply, the story spilling out in fragmented sentences, each word heavy with disbelief. "We were just walking home, laughing, and then she called the cops and they handcuffed us." Jamal's words were quieter, more fractured. "We didn't do anything, we were just—" His voice caught in his throat. He swallowed hard, trying to finish, but couldn't. The fear had lodged itself in his chest like a stone. Maya listened without interruption. Her mind cataloged each detail, their exact movements, the neighbor's behavior, the timing, the response. Her analytical side kicked in even as her maternal instincts burned hot. She understood the mechanics of bias, the patterns of racial profiling. She understood how the neighbor's fear, however irrational, had escalated into a near tragedy. And she understood something else. Her sons' lives could have been irreparably changed in those minutes. The twins leaned back in their chairs, exhaustion visible in every line of their bodies. Jordan rubbed his eyes, trying to blink away the lingering panic. Jamal rested his head on the table, silent tears soaking into the wood. Maya's voice softened. "It's not your fault, you did nothing wrong." Her words, simple as they were, hung in the air like a lifeline. The twins repeated them silently, letting the mantra anchor them. As the initial shock faded, Maya began to explain. She told them about perception, about assumptions, about the way fear can distort reality. She told them they were not responsible for other people's biases, no matter how powerful those biases might feel. She reminded them of their value, their intelligence, their right to exist without fear of suspicion. The twins listened, absorbing the words like water in a drought. Slowly, the tension began to ebb. They weren't safe yet, not entirely, but for the first time that evening they felt seen, understood, and protected. Outside, the neighborhood remained oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded behind closed doors. The streetlights flickered as if nothing had happened. The suburban calm returned, though the echoes of sirens and fear lingered in the air like a memory. Later that evening, Maya called her sister, a confidant she trusted above all. She recounted the events in detail, her voice measured but shaking at times. Her sister listened, horrified but unwavering in her support. They discussed next steps. How to document the incident, how to speak with the authorities, how to ensure this wouldn't happen again. Meanwhile, the twins went to their rooms. Jordan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how quickly normal life could turn upside down. He tried to remember the carefree moments from the day before, the joke he shared with Jamal, the way sunlight hit the schoolyard, the smell of freshly sharpened pencils. But those memories felt fragile now, overshadowed by fear. Jamal, in his room, replayed every moment from the street. He analyzed every movement, every glance from Carol, every gesture that had triggered the neighbor's suspicion. He hated the feeling that his existence, his mere presence, had been enough to invoke fear. But slowly, he began to understand what his mother had been telling him all along. They were not at fault. The world had failed them, yes, but they were not broken. Maya moved quietly through the house, checking on each of them, making sure the night passed without incident. She watched them sleep fitfully, the events of the evening weighing heavily on their bodies and minds. She thought about the history of racial bias, the countless families who had endured far worse without reprieve. And she vowed, silently but firmly, that she would not let her children be another statistic. As the night stretched on, the city beyond their street carried on in ignorant oblivion. Sirens, lights, and news trucks were distant echoes of lives untouched. But inside this home, a family had confronted fear, injustice, and bias directly and survived. They were still whole. They were still together. And yet, the danger had only just begun. Tomorrow, the world would see them differently. The news cameras would show Maya's face from the evening broadcast, the story of her advocacy and bravery shining bright. And in that light, the very people who had acted out of fear tonight would soon learn exactly who they had underestimated. The twins slept, but their mother's mind stayed awake, planning, calculating, preparing. Every phone call, every step forward, every legal avenue would be considered. Justice would not be passive. Justice would not wait for convenience. Justice would be intentional, fierce, and unwavering. For Jordan, for Jamal, for every child who could be judged for simply existing, Maya understood that tonight was not just a night of fear. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And what the neighborhood did not yet realize, what Carol Whitaker did not yet know, was that the family standing behind closed doors was about to change the story entirely. The morning after the terrifying evening, the twins awoke to a world that had shifted without their permission. The sun was bright, almost unbearably so, illuminating every corner of their suburban street with harsh clarity. For Jordan and Jamal, the warmth of daylight brought no comfort. The memory of last night's sirens, flashlights, and handcuffs clung to their minds like shadows refusing to lift. They moved through the house quietly, avoiding the kitchen, avoiding the living room, avoiding the large picture window that overlooked Carol's porch. Their mother, Maya, was already awake, her posture tense but controlled, like a soldier preparing for battle. She had spent the night researching, planning, and documenting. She had printed copies of witness statements, news reports, and legal forms. Her quiet diligence was a shield, a reminder that fear alone could not protect her children, but knowledge and preparation could. The twins sat at the breakfast table, their movements sluggish. Toast sat untouched in front of them, eggs cooled and congealed on the plate. The silence stretched until Maya finally spoke. Her voice was calm but filled with urgency. Today we begin reclaiming control. Today we make sure what happened yesterday never happens again. Jordan looked up, his dark eyes wary. Mom, do you think they'll come back? Maya shook her head, her expression firm. They might. That's why we have to be ready. We will not be caught off guard again, not by fear, not by assumptions, not by anyone. Jamal finally looked up, a spark of resolve igniting in his eyes. We're ready, Mom. Whatever it takes, we're ready. The morning passed in a blur of preparation. Maya instructed them on what to say if anyone approached them, how to document their own actions, and how to remain calm even in the face of irrational accusations. The twins absorbed every word, realizing for the first time that safety was no longer automatic. It had to be actively maintained. By mid-morning, the twins decided to step outside. The street looked deceptively calm. Carol Whitaker's porch was empty, but her presence seemed embedded in the space. Every shadow, every flicker of movement across the lawn felt like a warning. Jordan's grip tightened on his backpack strap. Jamal mirrored the tension. Both boys had the same thought. Yesterday's fear could return at any moment. They approached the edge of the street, just beyond Carol's property line. Jordan adjusted his jacket nervously, glancing toward the house across the way. Nothing moved. Nothing spoke. Everything seemed normal, but the memory of last night's sirens made normal feel fragile. Suddenly, movement on the porch caught their attention. Carol was there, her stance rigid, her phone in hand. She watched them with a narrow, calculating gaze. It was not curiosity. There was something darker lurking behind those eyes. Judgment, suspicion, fear. Jordan and Jamal froze. They had learned yesterday that perception was as dangerous as any weapon, and Carol's eyes now carried all the weight of assumption. They knew the only way to avoid confrontation was to remain calm, invisible if possible. But invisibility was not granted easily. Carol took a step forward, and her voice, sharp and deliberate, broke the quiet of the morning. "What are you two doing?" Jordan opened his mouth, intending to respond politely, but words failed. Jamal stepped slightly in front of him, instinctively, protective. Carol's eyes narrowed further. Her fingers curled around the phone again, hovering over the screen. And then it happened, a single impulsive motion. The phone dialed 911. This time the response was faster, more aggressive. Within minutes, lights flashed, sirens screamed, and a swarm of officers appeared, surrounding the twins on the street. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, unaware of the layers of fear and misunderstanding that had led to this moment. Jordan raised his hands instinctively. Jamal mirrored him. Their hearts pounded in synchronized panic. Officers shouted commands, some harsh, some confused. Jordan's mind raced. This is exactly what happened last night. This cannot happen again. A young officer approached, flashlight cutting across their faces. He hesitated, recognizing the twins from yesterday's report, but hesitation was dangerous. The first officer's tone grew impatient. "Hands behind your back now." Jordan obeyed, slowly, deliberately, trying to maintain composure. Jamal followed suit. Their bodies were tense, every muscle coiled in fear, every breath shallow. They had learned the hard way that defiance could escalate. Submission could save them. From the porch, Carol watched, her expression a mixture of fear and triumph. She did not see the terror reflected in the twins' eyes. She did not see the innocence that had been assaulted yet again. She only saw her perception, now reinforced by the authority of the law. Maya arrived moments later, running down the street, heart hammering, face flushed. She had anticipated this possibility. She had rehearsed her response, memorized every fact, prepared every argument. But nothing could erase the sight of her children being restrained, being judged, being assumed guilty. "Stop!" Maya shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Officers froze, momentarily disoriented by the sudden intensity. "You're making a mistake. These are my children. They are not doing anything wrong." Jordan and Jamal turned their heads to see their mother, relief mingling with continued fear. Maya's presence was commanding, but it was also a signal that this fight was far from over. The officers hesitated, glancing between the twins and Maya. Reports from yesterday had been filed, names taken, but assumptions die hard. In that moment, the street held its breath. The quiet tension of yesterday's evening was amplified, thickened by the potential for escalation. Neighbors began to peek out, murmurs spreading like wildfire. "Isn't that the twins from the news last night?" one whispered. Another shook her head, uncertain. The world was starting to recognize the stakes, but recognition alone was insufficient. Maya spoke rapidly, her tone calm but authoritative. "I will provide identification. I will provide proof of who they are. You have no reason to detain them further." The officer's expression softened slightly, recognition dawning. The twins, though restrained, could finally exhale, though only fractionally. Their eyes met briefly, a shared glance of determination. They would not be broken. Carol's expression faltered. Her certainty cracked, revealing fear of exposure. For the first time, she realized the magnitude of the consequences of her actions. What she had perceived as protection had nearly become destruction. As Maya continued to assert her authority, detailing their identities, legal rights, and prior incident, the tension began to shift. The officers released their grips slightly, still cautious but now listening. The twins remained tense, hearts pounding, but the immediate danger began to dissipate. It was in this fragile window that the real stakes became apparent. The family was up against more than fear. They were up against bias, perception, and a society that often judged first and questioned later. And this fight, this inciting incident, was only the beginning. The morning concluded with the twins unharmed but shaken. Maya's mind raced with next steps, contacting the police department, documenting the incident, preparing for media exposure if necessary, and ensuring that her children's safety was never compromised again. Yet even as they returned inside, hearts still hammering, the world outside continued unaware of the ripple effects being set in motion. Friends, neighbors, strangers, each would soon learn that one impulsive action could alter lives forever. And the twins knew, with an unspoken understanding between them, that their normal life had already been irrevocably disrupted. What they had faced in minutes would echo through days, weeks, and months. And through it all, they would have to navigate a world that had almost judged them before it ever saw them. The inciting incident had arrived. The stage was set. The family's resilience, courage, and intelligence would now be tested in ways they had never imagined, and in ways no child should ever have to endure. The street outside fell silent once more, the echoes of sirens fading into memory. But the emotional storm had only begun, and for the twins, the battle was far from over. Every step forward would demand awareness, courage, and a relentless commitment to truth. And what no one yet knew, not Carol, not the neighbors, not even some of the officers, was that Maya Williams, their mother, was not just any mother. She was the woman whose name had dominated the evening news hours ago. The woman whose advocacy and courage had already left a mark on the city. What they didn't know would change everything. The twins sat in the living room, still wrapped in the aftershocks of the morning confrontation. Their mother, Maya, had calmed them enough to focus, but the tension that gripped the house refused to leave. Every sound, every rustle, every passing car felt amplified. The faint hum of traffic outside, the creak of floorboards, even the ticking of the living room clock, all seemed to echo with threat. Maya's gaze lingered on her sons, studying the subtle ways fear had imprinted itself on their bodies. Jordan kept glancing at the window, as if expecting sirens to burst back into the quiet suburban street. Jamal's hands fidgeted with the edges of his shirt, a nervous rhythm he had developed over months of living cautiously in a world that often assumed the worst. She took a deep breath, the kind that steadies a parent but carries the weight of responsibility. "We're not just reacting," she said. "We're preparing, and preparation means understanding everything, every angle, every consequence." Jordan's brow furrowed. "Mom, do you really think people will change?" Maya shook her head slowly. "Some will, some won't, but the truth doesn't depend on them, it depends on us, and that's what matters most." The morning blurred into afternoon. Maya contacted an attorney she had known for years, someone she trusted to navigate the subtle yet brutal intersections of law and racial bias. The attorney listened patiently, taking notes, asking detailed questions about the events. She reminded Maya that the twins' story was not just personal, it was systemic. What had happened was the result of fear meeting assumptions, assumptions meeting power, and power meeting inertia. While calls were made and documents prepared, the twins wandered to the back porch, cautiously, silently. The backyard was fenced, private, yet they moved as though the walls could not protect them from invisible judgment. The sun had shifted to late afternoon, painting the yard in warm golds and long shadows. Jordan tilted his head, watching the familiar swing set in the corner, remembering afternoons of laughter before suspicion had entered their lives. Jamal joined him, silent, as if the weight of the day had settled across his shoulders. "It's not fair," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't do anything. Why does it feel like the whole world's against us?" Jordan didn't answer immediately. He knew that words alone couldn't dissolve the tension. He looked out at the street, the neighbor's house faintly visible in the distance. Carol Whitaker had not appeared, but her presence was felt, an unseen force pressing down, reminding them of yesterday's confrontation. Maya called them in for a family meeting. They gathered around the dining table, the surface now littered with papers, printed news reports, and notes. Maya spoke with a clarity that cut through fear. "We are going to control the narrative. We will show the truth, and we will not allow assumptions to define us. But this is a step-by-step process. We move carefully, strategically, and without panic." The twins listened intently, their earlier panic shifting into cautious determination. They had learned something important. Fear was powerful, but so was preparation. They had learned that moments of danger, moments of misunderstanding, could be mitigated if they understood the environment and anticipated every possible outcome. Later that day, Maya arranged a neighborhood walk, not just for exercise, but to gauge the atmosphere, to observe reactions without confrontation. Jordan and Jamal followed quietly, their steps careful but deliberate. The suburban street looked calm, almost serene, but the twins' eyes read tension in every smile, suspicion in every glance, hesitation in every neighbor's movement. Carol Whitaker appeared on her porch again, silently observing. Her posture was tighter than before, her eyes sharper, calculating. She did not speak, but the twins knew she was waiting, watching, ready to act if her fear dictated it. The tension of observation was broken when a neighbor, a middle-aged man walking his dog, passed by. Jordan greeted him cautiously, polite but wary. The man smiled, nodded, and walked on. A tiny victory, but enough to demonstrate that not everyone assumed the worst. Jamal exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest lifting fractionally. Maya gave them a small nod, signaling recognition of the progress. Back home, the family prepared for another evening. Maya had arranged interviews with a local journalist who had previously covered her advocacy work. She wanted to ensure the story of yesterday's false accusation and the twins' innocence would be shared accurately. The journalist arrived in the late afternoon, equipment in tow, ready to document the family's perspective. The twins were nervous, naturally. The idea of cameras, microphones, and public attention was intimidating, but they were guided by their mother's calm authority, her assurance that truth was a shield stronger than fear. As the journalist asked questions, Maya detailed the morning events, the false assumptions, and the procedural failures. She spoke not just as a mother, but as an advocate, a teacher, a woman determined to protect her children while also highlighting the larger issue of bias and assumption in everyday life. Jordan and Jamal added details cautiously, their voices shaking at first but growing steadier as the journalist listened intently. When the interview concluded, the journalist nodded solemnly, acknowledging the gravity of the story. "This isn't just your story," she said. "It's a reflection of the environment children like yours navigate every day. People need to understand this." The family spent the remainder of the evening reviewing footage, organizing documents, and strategizing next steps. They were exhausted, but a new sense of purpose filled the room. The threat of misunderstanding was still present, but now it was met with planning and preparation, rather than paralyzing fear. As night fell, the twins reflected quietly in their rooms. Jordan lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to comprehend how quickly a walk home had escalated into confrontation, how assumptions could so easily dictate action. Jamal, meanwhile, sat at his desk, scribbling in a notebook, cataloging his thoughts, documenting his experience, an act of control in a world that had tried to strip them of it. Maya moved between rooms, checking on both of them. She thought about the neighbor, about systemic bias, about how fear and assumption could cascade into real-world consequences. And she resolved that this story, this fight for recognition, understanding, and justice, would be approached deliberately. Every decision, every step would matter. The night passed with a sense of guarded optimism. The family had survived the immediate threat, but they understood that the rising action had only begun. The neighbor's assumptions, the neighborhood's gaze, the systemic forces that enabled fear-based reactions, all of these were obstacles yet to be faced. The twins fell asleep with a tentative sense of hope, knowing they were not powerless, knowing that with their mother's guidance, they could navigate the storm. But the tension in the air hinted that the coming days would push them to confront fear, challenge assumptions, and assert truth in the most public and personal ways imaginable. The suburban street lay quiet, shadows stretching long and dark, but inside the home, resilience, courage, and resolve had taken root. The rising action had begun, and there was no turning back. The next morning, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable, though the streets appeared deceptively calm. Birds chirped as if nothing had happened, and the suburban houses, with their neat lawns and flowering shrubs, stood silent witnesses to the unfolding story. But inside the Williams home, silence was impossible. Maya moved through the house with purpose, a living force of vigilance and strategy. "Today, we document everything," she told the twins as they gathered in the living room. "Every step we take outside, every interaction, every phone call, it all matters. Truth must be undeniable, even before fear can distort it." Jordan nodded, determination flickering in his eyes, though unease lingered in his posture. Jamal, ever the quieter twin, bit his lip, thinking of Carol Whitaker's narrow gaze from the porch, of the way her judgment had almost destroyed their evening. Fear had been transformed into vigilance, hesitation into awareness. By mid-morning, Maya decided it was time to reclaim the street. She led the twins to the front door, their movements deliberate, calm, but cautious. They stepped onto the familiar sidewalk, aware that every neighbor's glance could carry suspicion or curiosity. The twins had learned that ordinary actions could be misread, misinterpreted, weaponized even, if observed through the lens of fear. Carol Whitaker was already on her porch, arms crossed, phone in hand, eyes scanning the twins like predators sizing prey. Her posture screamed readiness, her mind cataloging every movement for potential threat. But Maya, moving with quiet authority, did not flinch. "Good morning," Maya said, her voice even composed, carrying warmth and confidence. "We're just heading out for a walk." Carol's lips pressed into a thin line. She did not respond. She only watched, as if her silence could somehow reinforce the power of her judgment. The twins followed their mother down the sidewalk, careful to keep pace and maintain composure. Every step was measured, every glance controlled. The wind brushed against their faces, carrying both the scent of fresh-cut grass and the intangible tension of yesterday's confrontation. Jordan whispered to his mother, barely audible, "Mom, she's still watching. She hasn't said a word." "I know," Maya replied softly. "Let her watch. Her assumptions won't change the truth. We walk with it." As they approached the corner, a neighbor they had never spoken to before appeared, walking a dog. The man's eyes flicked toward the family, hesitant, uncertain. Jordan forced a small, polite smile. The man nodded slowly, and a momentary sense of validation passed through the twins. Not everyone assumed the worst. Not everyone reacted out of fear. Some still saw humanity. But that hope was fragile. Across the street, Carol's eyes remained fixed. She whispered something under her breath, likely to herself, likely to reinforce her own assumptions. Her fingers hovered near the speed dial of 911, a silent threat that had already shown its power. The family continued their walk, reaching the small park at the end of the block. It was a space the twins had once considered safe, a place of swings, slides, and open grass. But today, even here, vigilance was required. Maya instructed them to play, to interact naturally, but to observe and record. Every interaction, every glance from passers-by could become evidence if assumptions again escalated into danger. Jordan and Jamal approached the swings cautiously. Jordan took the first swing, his feet pushing gently against the ground, his body moving rhythmically. Jamal followed, smaller arcs at first, then gradually higher. Their laughter began tentatively, then grew with confidence, a fragile reclaiming of childhood joy amidst tension. Maya watched them closely, her phone discreetly recording video for documentation purposes. She knew that truth was not enough in a world that could distort perception with a single fearful call. Proof would be required. Evidence would be their shield. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a phone ringing broke through the park's morning calm. Both twins froze mid-motion. Jordan's swing slowed, Jamal's legs stopped pumping. Their hearts raced. Maya glanced at her own phone, Carol Whitaker. Maya did not answer immediately. Instead, she assessed the situation, breathing deeply, considering every possibility. She knew Carol might attempt confrontation, escalation, or manipulation. Maya decided to control the interaction. She stepped forward confidently, holding the phone. "Yes, Carol," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I understand your concern, but I assure you my children are safe, innocent, and walking home as they should. Your assumptions yesterday nearly caused real harm. I would advise caution before repeating such actions." Carol's voice trembled slightly, though she tried to maintain control. I was just worried." Maya's tone softened slightly, though her resolve remained. "Worry is understandable, but fear cannot dictate reality. We cannot allow bias to create incidents that endanger children. I expect you to respect that going forward." The line went quiet. Carol hung up and Maya returned the phone to her pocket. The twins, still tense, glanced at her, reading reassurance in her calm expression. Jordan whispered, "You handled that perfectly, Mom." Jamal nodded, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. But Maya knew this was only a temporary victory. The challenge was ongoing, systemic, pervasive, and deeply ingrained. Fear and bias were not easily corrected with a single conversation. The family returned home later that day, the twins exhausted but slightly buoyed by their progress. Maya began organizing a letter to the neighborhood association, explaining the events, clarifying the truth, and subtly highlighting the dangers of assumptions and implicit bias. She knew that public acknowledgement, careful phrasing, and documented truth could create an environment less prone to impulsive judgments in the future. That evening, the news cycle shifted unexpectedly. A local anchor mentioned Maya's prior advocacy work, highlighting her efforts to protect children in schools and communities. Her name and image appeared across multiple channels. Jordan and Jamal watched the broadcast with awe. They realized their mother's influence extended far beyond their home, and that her courage had already set in motion a form of protection they hadn't fully appreciated before. Yet amidst the pride and reassurance, the twins understood that not everyone would recognize her authority or her intention. Fear and bias were stubborn, recurring forces that could manifest unpredictably. Carol Whitaker was just one example. Others could follow. The twins began to internalize the harsh truth. Vigilance was now a part of life. The following days were a delicate balancing act. School routines continued, but every encounter, every glance from classmates or neighbors carried the weight of possibility. Jordan and Jamal adapted, learning subtle ways to de-escalate potential threats: soft smiles, polite nods, calm responses, and careful observation. Maya, meanwhile, met with the school administrators, explaining the incident in detail. She shared documentation, witness statements, and video evidence. The school staff listened, some nodding in understanding, others squirming in discomfort. The message was clear: assumptions could no longer endanger children, and accountability would be enforced. Late one afternoon, as the twins returned home, Carol Whittaker appeared in her yard again. She didn't call the police, didn't approach them. But her stance, arms crossed, frown etched across her face, communicated unspoken tension. Maya approached her slowly, deliberately, projecting calm authority. "Carol," Maya said evenly, "I hope you understand the consequences of your previous actions. Fear cannot replace understanding. Assumptions cannot replace truth." Carol's gaze flickered, a mixture of fear, shame, and stubborn pride. She said nothing. Maya nodded slightly, signaling both an acknowledgement and a warning. The story was being rewritten, and in this narrative, truth, vigilance, and dignity would not be ignored. As evening fell, the family gathered in the living room. Jordan and Jamal were quiet but reflective, processing the events and their implications. Maya spoke softly, her voice carrying both comfort and resolve. "We are navigating a world that often misunderstands us," she said, "but we have each other, and that is more powerful than fear." The twins exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming between them. Strength was not just physical, not just loud. It was the quiet resilience that carried them through judgment, through fear, through bias. And in this moment, they recognized that they were learning, growing, and preparing for whatever came next. The night stretched on, calm but alert, as the suburban street seemed to exhale in collective uncertainty. The rising action had escalated the stakes, deepened the tension, and illuminated the challenges yet to come. Every decision, every observation, every interaction now carried weight, and the twins, armed with guidance, documentation, and resilience, were ready to face what would inevitably arrive next. The stage was set for confrontation, revelation, and truth. And in the quiet hum of the night, Maya, Jordan, and Jamal understood something profound. Their story was not just about fear, bias, or misunderstanding. It was about justice, dignity, and the courage to stand even when the world refused to see clearly. The morning light spilled through the blinds, painting the living room in streaks of gold and shadow. Maya stood at the window, coffee in hand, staring out at the street. Every car that passed, every pedestrian that wandered too close to the curb felt like a potential threat. But today was different. Today, the tension was mixed with anticipation, an almost electric energy that crackled in the air. Jordan and Jamal sat at the kitchen table, notebooks open, fingers tracing lines of carefully recorded events, times, and observations. The twins were preparing, not just for school, not just for normal life, but for confrontation. They knew the story that had begun on their street in their lives was now public. The power dynamics that had almost destroyed their morning walk yesterday were about to collide with the truth. Maya took a deep breath, gathering herself. "Today, everything changes," she said softly. "This isn't just about what happened yesterday. It's about every assumption, every act of fear that's ever threatened you. Today, the world sees the truth." The first step was the neighborhood association meeting. It was being held in the community center, a small hall filled with folding chairs, fluorescent lights, and the faint smell of polished linoleum. Residents filed in slowly, some murmuring to one another, others looking around nervously. Carol Whittaker entered late, her posture rigid, her lips pressed thin, hands clutching a folded piece of paper. She scanned the room, eyes locking onto Maya immediately, her previous confidence now tempered with unease. Maya entered calmly, Jordan and Jamal beside her, her presence commanding the room. The chatter fell silent as the association president gestured for them to sit. Maya's voice carried easily across the space, steady and unwavering. "I'm here today to address an incident that occurred in our neighborhood," she began. "An incident fueled by assumptions, fear, and bias. My children were wrongfully accused of wrongdoing, and I am here to present the truth." The twins' eyes widened slightly, hearts pounding in synchrony. They had rehearsed this moment in whispers and late-night conversations, but now it was real. The room was filled with neighbors, many of whom had only seen the incident through filtered perspectives, rumors, whispers, and assumptions. Carol shifted in her seat, uncomfortable under the weight of attention. Her piece of paper trembled slightly in her hands. She hadn't anticipated that the narrative would shift so quickly, that authority, preparation, and truth would converge to confront her actions. Maya continued, presenting documentation, video evidence, and witness statements. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Every resident's gaze alternated between Carol and the Williams family. Every silent judgment was met with undeniable proof, every whisper countered by facts, clarity, and moral authority. Jordan and Jamal stood beside their mother, their posture straight, their voices now confident as they corroborated her account. "We were walking home," Jordan said. "Just like any other day, we didn't do anything wrong, we didn't threaten anyone, but assumptions turned fear into action." Jamal nodded, adding, "It was scary, but our mom taught us that truth is stronger than fear, and we are telling the truth now." The room shifted, a subtle but unmistakable change in energy. Neighbors who had previously looked on passively now exchanged glances, some nodding, others whispering apologies, real or imagined. Carol Whittaker's expression faltered further. Her composure was cracking under the undeniable weight of evidence. Maya stepped closer to the podium, voice firm. "Fear should never dictate actions that can harm children. Bias should never be allowed to replace justice, and assumptions cannot be mistaken for truth. Today, I ask that we collectively acknowledge what has happened, take accountability, and commit to a neighborhood that values evidence, fairness, and the protection of every child." A murmur rose from the audience, hesitant, uncertain, but growing. The president nodded solemnly, glancing at Carol, whose eyes now darted nervously around the room. The power balance was shifting. Authority, preparation, and truth were converging in a way that Carol could not control. And then the moment came. One neighbor, a woman who had been quiet the entire time, stood and spoke. I didn't know," she admitted, voice trembling. "I assumed I shouldn't have, I'm sorry." Another voice followed. "We all need to be careful. Fear can do dangerous things, but truth protects us." Maya felt the tide turning. The tension that had gripped the room for days, weeks, even was beginning to release. The twins stood taller, pride and relief mingling with lingering adrenaline. The emotional weight of being judged, assumed guilty, and nearly harmed was slowly giving way to validation, acknowledgement, and the first taste of justice. Carol Whittaker rose, her hands shaking slightly. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic. I didn't realize I overreacted." Maya's gaze met hers, unwavering, commanding, yet not cruel. "Acknowledgement is the first step," she said firmly. "Actions have consequences, Carol. Today the community sees that, and we hope lessons are learned, not repeated." The tension broke. The room exhaled collectively. Whispers filled the air, conversations sparked, and for the first time, Jordan and Jamal felt seen, respected, and understood. Fear had been confronted with truth. Assumptions had been replaced by facts. Bias had been challenged by courage. After the meeting, as neighbors slowly left, Maya guided her sons outside. The afternoon sun was warm, the air carrying a faint breeze that seemed almost symbolic, carrying away fear, replacing it with clarity and resilience. Jordan glanced back at the community center. "Mom, we did it. We made them see." Maya nodded, her expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "We didn't just make them see, we made them think, and thinking is the first step toward change." But even as victory settled over them, a shadow lingered. Carol Whittaker, though forced to acknowledge her mistake, had yet to fully confront the implications of her actions. The twins had survived, the truth had been presented, but the human tendency toward fear and judgment would continue to test them in ways no single meeting could fully resolve. Later that evening, as the family returned home, the news outlets contacted Maya to verify details. Her previous advocacy work, combined with the recent neighborhood incident, had attracted attention. Cameras, microphones, and reporters created a new form of exposure, a public stage far broader than their block. Jordan and Jamal watched with awe as their mother navigated interviews, speaking clearly, calmly, and with authority. Her words highlighted bias, fear, and assumptions while advocating for protection, fairness, and accountability. The twins realized the story they had lived through. The confrontation, the documentation, the preparation was now shaping public discourse. The climax was unfolding not just in their neighborhood, but across the community. Justice, dignity, and truth were on display, resonating beyond the walls of their home. The family's courage had created ripples, challenging assumptions and demanding reflection. As night fell, the twins sat quietly in their rooms, absorbing the day. Jordan whispered, "I can't believe how much changed in just one day." Jamal nodded, voice steady but soft. "We were almost judged, almost punished, but now it's different. We showed them who we really are. Maya moved through the hallway, checking on them, her presence calm but fierce. This is only the beginning, she said. Courage is not just about confronting fear, it's about transforming it. Today, we transformed it. The family gathered one last time in the living room, the glow of the evening lights casting long shadows on the walls. Their journey through fear, bias, and near confrontation had reached a crescendo. The climax, where truth, justice, and moral authority collided with prejudice, had arrived. And yet, even at this moment of triumph, Maya's mind remained vigilant. She understood that exposure, acknowledgement, and validation were victories, but the path forward required ongoing courage, awareness, and resilience. The twins, nestled beside their mother, realized something profound. The world may see fear first, but truth, courage, and dignity always have the power to reclaim it. Outside, the street was quiet once more. Shadows stretched long under the lamplights, but inside the Williams home, light had been restored, not just from lamps or sunlight, but from the luminous force of justice, preparation, and unshakable truth. The battle had reached its emotional and moral apex. The confrontation had been won, not with anger or revenge, but with evidence, courage, and unwavering commitment to right. And for the first time in days, the twins felt something they hadn't felt since yesterday morning. Safety, recognition, and the thrill of victory earned not by force, but by truth. The evening deepened, casting long shadows across the street. Yet inside the Williams home, a different kind of illumination filled the space, a radiant sense of triumph intertwined with exhaustion. The family had faced judgment, bias, and fear head-on, and emerged, if not entirely unscathed, at least with dignity intact. But the climax was far from over. The real confrontation, the one that would cement justice and moral authority, was still unfolding on the public stage. The journalist Maya had met days earlier called again, urging a live interview for a local news segment. This was no casual recording. It was national attention, a moment that could amplify the family's truth to thousands, potentially millions. Jordan and Jamal exchanged nervous glances. The idea of cameras, lights, and a live audience was intimidating, but Maya's steady hand, her unwavering presence, made them feel anchored. "We do this together," she said softly. "We speak truth, nothing more, nothing less." The family arrived at the studio, greeted by the hum of equipment, the bustle of crew members, and the bright glare of stage lights. The twins felt the weight of expectation and history pressing down. This was more than an interview. It was a reckoning. Maya was first to speak, poised and authoritative. "Yesterday," she began, addressing the cameras, "my children were wrongfully accused by a neighbor, purely based on assumptions and fear. This incident is not isolated. It reflects a larger problem in society where bias and judgment can endanger the innocent." Jordan and Jamal stood beside her, visible, present, embodying the truth of her words. Jordan took a deep breath. "We were just walking home. We didn't do anything wrong, but the assumptions made about us, it almost ruined everything. We were scared. But we're safe now, and we want people to understand what fear and bias can do." The camera panned across the studio, capturing the reactions of the crew, the journalist, and even the control room. Every word resonated. Every pause carried the weight of lived experience. This was no longer about fear, it was about transformation. Maya continued, detailing the documentation, the evidence, and the neighborhood meeting that had validated their story. "Accountability is essential," she emphasized. "Acknowledgement without action is meaningless. Today, I stand here to ensure that truth is recognized, bias is challenged, and innocence is protected." The twins' hearts pounded as the journalist asked questions about Carol Whitaker's reaction. Maya answered calmly, unwaveringly, detailing Carol's acknowledgement of error, the neighborhood's response, and the lessons learned. Her words were not confrontational. They were commanding, filled with moral authority, yet rooted in empathy. Jordan added, "We want people to understand that fear can be dangerous. Misjudgment can hurt real people, real families. We're telling our story so others don't have to go through what we did." Jamal, quiet but resolute, said, "Truth matters more than fear. Courage matters more than assumptions, and sometimes, just sometimes, speaking up can change everything." Outside the studio, the live broadcast began to reach homes across the city. Social media picked up the story immediately. Tweets, shares, comments flooded in. People expressed outrage, empathy, and support. Others, those whose lives had been shaped by fear and assumption, paused to reflect. Maya's calm authority and the twins' courage were creating ripples far beyond the immediate community. Back in the studio, the journalist asked a final, pointed question. What message do you want the world to take away from this? Maya's voice was unwavering, firm yet compassionate. Children must be protected from judgment born of fear. Families must be supported when facing systemic bias. And communities must recognize the weight of assumptions before they act. That is the message. Jordan and Jamal nodded in unison. The twins had endured confrontation, witnessed fear escalate into near damage, and now stood in the light of validation, their innocence not just recognized but celebrated. The broadcast concluded, but the emotional resonance did not fade. The family returned home that night, the street quiet, the night air cool. But inside, hearts were alight. They had faced judgment, bias, fear, and public scrutiny, and had transformed it into recognition, justice, and moral clarity. Carol Whitaker, now fully aware of the public visibility of the situation, had a private reckoning of her own. Her assumptions, once hidden behind fear and suspicion, were now exposed. Accountability was no longer theoretical, it was real. And while the twins did not seek vengeance, justice had found its way through preparation, courage, and unwavering truth. In the quiet of their living room, Maya hugged the twins tightly. "You were brave," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Not because you faced danger, but because you faced the world honestly, without giving in to fear, without hiding from judgment." Jordan whispered, "Mom, I think people are finally listening." Maya nodded. "Yes, and tomorrow we keep moving forward. Fear may return. Assumptions may try to creep back. But now we know that truth, courage, and resilience are stronger than any shadow." The twins reflected silently on the journey that had brought them here. From the harrowing morning when fear and bias almost destroyed their peace, to the neighborhood confrontation, to the public acknowledgement and broadcast. Every step, every rehearsal, every cautious action had built to this moment. A culmination of emotional tension, moral victory, and personal growth. Outside, the suburban street glowed under streetlights, silent and still. But inside the Williams home, light radiated in another way, a light born of victory earned through courage, truth, and unwavering dignity. The climax had been reached. The confrontation had been resolved. Fear had been transformed into awareness. Assumptions had been replaced by evidence. Justice, at last, had been affirmed. Jordan and Jamal finally exhaled, letting the adrenaline drain, their bodies relaxing into a rare, unburdened calm. Maya observed them, pride swelling in her chest. This was more than a victory over a neighbor's fear. It was a moral victory, a societal statement, a transformation in perception and understanding. That night, as the family prepared for bed, the twins understood something profound. Their world would never be exactly the same. They had faced public scrutiny, personal threat, and societal bias, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and braver. And for Maya, this moment reaffirmed everything she had fought for: protection of innocence, the power of preparation, and the unassailable strength of truth. The climax, the apex of tension and moral reckoning, had been reached. And as the city slept under its quiet lamplights, one undeniable fact lingered. What fear had almost destroyed, courage had restored. And the Williams family, united, resilient, and unwavering, stood ready for whatever the future might demand. The morning after the live broadcast, the Williams home was calm in a way it hadn't been for days. The sun poured through the windows, soft and warm, casting long beams over the living room floor. Maya sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, reviewing emails and messages that had begun pouring in. Support from neighbors, local organizations, and even strangers across the city had begun arriving, their words of empathy and solidarity both humbling and reassuring. Jordan and Jamal shuffled in, still quiet from the emotional intensity of the previous day. Their eyes, though bright, carried the weight of recent experience, fear, tension, and finally, relief. Their mother motioned for them to sit. "We've seen the storm pass," she said softly. "But it's not about surviving, it's about learning, growing, and moving forward." The twins exchanged glances. Jordan spoke first, hesitantly. "Mom, it feels like people finally understand, but will they really remember?" Maya's gaze met his, steady and full of conviction. "Some will, some won't, but what matters is that we acted, that we stood for truth, that we refused to be defined by fear or assumptions. That alone is transformative." The day unfolded slowly. The school called to arrange a meeting with the administration and teachers, acknowledging the incident and ensuring the twins would be supported. Maya brought the twins along, her presence commanding respect as she recounted the events, presented documentation, and outlined steps for systemic improvement. Teachers nodded solemnly, some avoiding eye contact, others visibly moved by the courage displayed. The twins began to feel the first inklings of restored normalcy, though still cautious. Returning home, Maya suggested they take a walk, not for observation or documentation this time, but for closure. The twins followed her down the street, noting the subtle changes in the neighborhood. Some neighbors waved, offering small smiles that carried a mix of apology and recognition. Others looked away, embarrassed or uncertain how to interact after the confrontation. The twins realized that actions had consequences, that courage created ripples beyond immediate awareness, and that truth, once spoken clearly, demanded acknowledgement. At the end of the block, the twins paused near the park. Jordan swung gently, the motion meditative, a symbol of regained innocence. Jamal sat on the swing beside him, legs dangling, reflecting on the journey that had led them here. "I never thought walking home could feel like this," Jordan said, voice low but thoughtful. Jamal nodded. "We almost lost our sense of safety, but now it feels earned, like we've reclaimed it." Maya approached, placing her hands on their shoulders. "Safety is never given, it is asserted. Today, through courage and truth, we have asserted it. Not just for you two, but for anyone who might be judged unfairly in this neighborhood, in this world." Later, as the afternoon sun began to fade, Maya arranged a small family meeting in the living room. This was not for strategy or defense, but reflection and healing. She encouraged the twins to speak openly about how the past days had affected them, what they had learned, and what they hoped for the future. Jordan spoke first, his voice steady. "I've learned that people will always make assumptions. Some will act on fear, but that doesn't mean we give up. It means we prepare, we document, and we speak the truth." Jamal added softly, "And that fear, it doesn't have to control us. Courage is louder." Maya nodded, tears welling slightly. "Exactly. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in preparation, in resilience, in standing for what is right even when others misjudge you. And that is a power no one can take away." The twins then took the initiative to document the story themselves, photos, journals, and even short reflections on their experience. This act was symbolic, a reclamation of narrative. They had lived through fear and misjudgment, but now they had the power to control how their story was told, how it would be remembered, and how it might inspire others. By evening, the family had gathered around the television. News outlets were running follow-ups, some focusing on Maya's advocacy, some highlighting the twins' experience, and some exploring the broader implications of bias in everyday life. Jordan and Jamal watched, realizing that their personal ordeal had become part of a larger conversation, a conversation about race, assumptions, fear, and courage. The day ended with quiet reflection. The twins retreated to their rooms, journaling thoughts, drawing, and speaking in hushed tones. Maya moved through the house, ensuring both felt safe, understood, and prepared to rest. She knew the emotional intensity of the past days could not be erased immediately, but the foundation for healing and empowerment had been firmly laid. That night, as darkness enveloped the street, the Williams family sat together in the living room one last time. The city outside hummed with life, lights flickering, cars passing, neighbors settling into their routines. Inside, a sense of peace settled over them, earned through courage, preparation, and truth. Shadows of fear remained only as memories, tempered now by resilience and justice. Maya reflected silently. Every confrontation, every judgment, every moment of fear had been transformed into clarity and moral strength. They had endured not by ignoring the threat, but by meeting it with unwavering preparation, dignity, and truth. And in this, the family understood a profound reality. Resilience was not just surviving, it was thriving in the face of systemic challenge, reclaiming safety, and asserting moral authority through courage. The next morning, the neighborhood felt subtly different. The tension that had once hung like a thick fog over the block was lighter, almost imperceptible. Children played in yards with less hesitation, neighbors exchanged tentative smiles, and the air carried a cautious, budding sense of accountability. Maya walked Jordan and Jamal to the corner of the block, letting them experience this small but meaningful change. "Do you feel it?" she asked, her voice calm yet intentional. "The difference isn't dramatic, but it's there. Awareness is growing. People are seeing the consequences of fear and bias, even if they can't fully grasp it yet." Jordan swung gently, looking around the street. I think some people really are thinking now about what they assumed, what they almost did." Maya nodded. "Exactly, and that thinking is the beginning of change. Small steps, repeated consistently, build a stronger, safer community." Back home, Maya began drafting letters to the school, neighborhood association, and local media outlets. Her words highlighted not only the incident but the lessons learned, the importance of evidence over assumption, and the power of community accountability. Jordan and Jamal assisted, contributing their reflections. Their voices, innocent, honest, and measured, added weight to the message. The twins' school invited Maya to lead a brief workshop on bias, assumptions, and safety for students and faculty. She accepted, knowing that teaching the next generation could prevent incidents like theirs from repeating. Jordan and Jamal participated as well, sharing their perspective on fear, courage, and the importance of speaking the truth. The room was quiet as students listened, some nodding, some frowning in reflection, and a few visibly moved. Even Carol Whitaker, who had withdrawn since the neighborhood meeting, began to take steps toward reconciliation. She quietly approached the Williams home one afternoon, hesitant but sincere. "Maya, I want to apologize," she said, voice tight with both shame and uncertainty. "I acted out of fear and bias, and I realize now how harmful that was. I hope to make amends." Maya regarded her, her expression firm yet measured. "Acknowledgement is the first step, Carol. Actions follow acknowledgement. Respect, vigilance, and honesty are how we rebuild trust. It's not easy, but it is possible." The twins watched silently, absorbing the subtle interplay of accountability and growth. Jordan whispered to Jamal, "Even fear has to face consequences." Jamal nodded, "Yeah, but it can also learn from truth." As the days turned into weeks, the Williams family's influence expanded quietly but meaningfully. Neighbors began to consider their words before making assumptions, to pause before acting on fear. The twins noticed small gestures, greetings, smiles, respectful distance. Some neighbors even engaged in conversations about racial bias and safety, demonstrating that the seeds planted by courage and truth were taking root. At home, the family established a nightly routine to reflect on the day. Each member shared moments of observation, growth, or insight. Maya encouraged Jordan and Jamal to voice fears, joys, and reflections, reinforcing both emotional intelligence and moral awareness. Over time, the twins grew more confident, not boastful, but assured in the knowledge that they could navigate challenges with dignity and resilience. One evening, the three sat on the front porch, the horizon painted in deep purples and soft oranges. Maya broke the comfortable silence. "Remember, children, the world will not always see truth immediately. Bias is persistent, fear is persistent, but persistence in courage, truth, and preparation, those are your tools. They are your armor, your voice, and your legacy." Jordan took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of her words. "I understand now. Courage isn't about fighting everyone. It's about standing firm, speaking truth, and letting actions speak louder than fear." Jamal added softly, "And it's about watching, observing, and learning, not just from others, but from ourselves." Maya smiled, a mixture of pride and tenderness. "Exactly, and that is what will keep you safe, strong, and respected, no matter the assumptions, no matter the fear." Later that night, the twins reflected privately. Jordan scribbled in his journal, "We survived fear, we learned truth, and we realized that courage grows when you refuse to let assumptions define you." Jamal added, "Fear almost controls people, but truth, evidence, and courage can control fear." Maya watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes but a heart full of gratitude. The journey had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and fraught with tension, but the result was more than survival. It was transformation. The family had turned confrontation into validation, judgment into reflection, and fear into moral clarity. The neighborhood, too, had subtly transformed. The story spread through local social media, prompting discussions among parents, teachers, and community leaders. People began to examine their own assumptions, considering how fear and bias might influence their decisions, their judgments, and their interactions. Maya's quiet authority, her courage, and her meticulous documentation had sparked not just personal resolution, but social reflection. In the final weeks of the incident's aftermath, Maya organized a small gathering for the neighborhood children. The event focused not on fear, but on community, inclusion, and respect. Jordan and Jamal participated actively, engaging peers in games that promoted cooperation, understanding, and communication. For the first time since the confrontation, the twins felt the neighborhood as a place of potential belonging, not threat. Maya watched them, a quiet sense of fulfillment settling in her chest. She understood that while fear and bias would never disappear entirely, the family had established a precedent, a standard for courage, truth, and moral accountability that would ripple outward, long after the immediate danger had passed. As night fell and the streetlights flickered to life, Maya, Jordan, and Jamal sat together once more. Their hands entwined, the quiet of the night punctuated by the soft rustle of leaves. The trials they had faced, the judgment, the fear, the near damage, had culminated not in bitterness or anger, but in empowerment, moral authority, and emotional resilience. Maya's final words of the day lingered in the cool night air. Remember this always: fear may appear first, but truth, courage, and preparation will always follow, and when they do, no assumption, no bias, no act of fear can stand against them. The twins smiled, hearts lighter, minds clearer. They had witnessed the power of standing firm, the importance of documentation, and the strength found in speaking truth. They had experienced firsthand that even in the face of prejudice and fear, dignity and courage could prevail. And outside, under the quiet suburban night, the neighborhood seemed to exhale. Shadows remained, yes, but they were tempered now, balanced by light, clarity, and the unshakable presence of justice and moral accountability. For the Williams family, life would continue, challenges would arise, but the lessons of the past days had been etched into their hearts. Fear could be confronted, assumptions could be dismantled, and truth, courage, and preparation would always carve a path to resolution. In every neighborhood, every street, every home, fear quietly lingers, sometimes disguised as caution, sometimes as assumption, and sometimes as outright judgment. But fear, no matter how persuasive, cannot withstand the force of truth, courage, and moral conviction. The Williams family story is proof. When people choose evidence over assumption, action over passivity, and honesty over convenience, justice finds its way, even in the most unexpected moments. Jordan and Jamal learned that fear can be contagious, but so can courage. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in preparation, in careful observation, and in standing up when the world would rather look away. And sometimes it shines brightest in the quiet act of reclaiming one's story, asserting one's dignity, and refusing to be defined by someone else's prejudice. Maya taught them, and everyone watching, the unshakable power of presence, of preparation, and of moral clarity. A parent's strength is not measured merely by physical protection, but by the lessons imparted, the voice of reason spoken in moments of chaos, and the unwavering belief that innocence deserves acknowledgement, protection, and truth. The world may judge too quickly, react too harshly, and assume too readily. But the story reminds us that accountability, education, and courage can break that cycle. Carol Whittaker's acknowledgement of her mistake, the neighborhood's reflection, and the twins' empowerment demonstrate that even the darkest assumptions can be challenged when people have the courage to confront fear, face bias, and embrace truth. And yet this story is not just about a single neighborhood or a single family. It's about the countless moments that happen unseen. Children judged unfairly, voices silenced by fear, lives affected by assumptions. It's about the responsibility each person carries, to pause before acting, to question before accusing, and to recognize the humanity in others. Because justice is not only a courtroom matter or a public spectacle. It begins in our hearts, in our decisions, and in our willingness to see clearly before we act. For Jordan, Jamal, and Maya, the experience was transformative. They reclaimed what fear almost took from them: peace, safety, and dignity. They learned that truth is a shield, preparation is armor, and courage is the light that exposes injustice. And for the neighbors who witnessed the unfolding of events, the lesson was undeniable. Assumptions hurt, accountability heals, and the world can change when people choose reflection over reaction. This story is a call to action. For parents, for communities, for anyone who witnesses fear, bias, or judgment. Stand up, speak out, document, advocate, and never let assumptions dictate the safety, dignity, or rights of another human being. Because in doing so, you create ripples of awareness that can transform lives, protect innocence, and restore justice in ways both small and profound. Jordan and Jamal's morning walks may never be the same. They may carry caution, awareness, and the memory of what almost happened. But they also carry resilience, confidence, and the knowledge that fear is not the final authority. Courage, preparation, and truth always come next. And when they do, justice is no longer a possibility, it is a reality. So remember, the world may see fear first, but truth, courage, and dignity follow. And when they do, even the darkest moments can be transformed into lessons, growth, and hope. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the lesson isn't just for one family, one neighborhood, or one child. It's for everyone who believes that fear should never define a life, and that courage, truth, and moral clarity can change the world.